Welcome to Global Tax Talk. I'm Nangel Kwong. I'm here in London today and delighted to be joined by Daniel Dzenkowski and Artur Olszewski, who are financial services tax directors in the UK and the Netherlands, respectively. Welcome and thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
We're here today to talk about the Crypto Asset Reporting Framework, or CARF, and the amendments to the Common Reporting Standard, or what is known as CRS 2.0, as these new rules go live in many countries as of 1 January 2026. I'm very lucky to have two experts in the room with me today to tell us more about these important changes. So Artur, you were part of the OECD Secretariat team that wrote the rules for CARF and CRS 2.0. And Daniel, you've been advising financial services businesses for over a decade on tax transparency regimes. So we're very lucky to have you both in the room to tell us more about these rules today. So let's start with the basics. Artur, could you tell us a bit more about why we have the CARF and the amendments to CRS 2.0 in the first place?
Sure. Well, since the CRS was launched in 2014, there have been a number of developments in the financial services market. So one development we've seen is the emergence of crypto assets. And so crypto assets currently wouldn't have met the definition of financial asset and therefore wouldn't be in scope of the CRS as it stands. And now that was perceived as a potential weakness and a potential way of circumventing the standard. So the G20 mandated the OECD to create a framework for the reporting and exchange of information on transactions in crypto assets, as you said, known as the CARF. So players that are active in that space will now need to consider that new set of reporting requirements. And in conjunction with that, the OECD conducted a review of the CRS to include in its scope central bank digital currencies, specified e-money products, as well as funds investing in crypto assets.
Perfect. Thanks, Artur. So turning to you next, Daniel, could you give me a brief explanation about CARF, the types of businesses that might be in scope of these new rules, and the new reporting this will entail for them?
Thanks, Nangel. Yeah, we're still trying to figure out the entire scope of businesses that are subject to these rules. But basically, it's any business that's engaged in sort of crypto asset activities. So this might be centralized exchanges that help their customers convert fiat currency, so your regular pounds and dollars and euros, into something like Bitcoin, then allow you to trade the Bitcoin, so exchange it for something like Ethereum, and then to cash out back to your regular currency. Those are the businesses that are in scope. And what they need to do is they need to understand who's engaging in those transactions, so who's the wallet holder. And they also need to understand the value of those transactions and the type of transactions. This is the kind of information that gets reported under the CARF.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Daniel. And back to you now, Artur. Could you tell me more about the new CRS 2.0 rules and which types of financial institutions might be in scope? But also, is it possible for a financial institution to be in scope of both the CARF rules that Daniel was just telling us and CRS 2.0?
Yeah, so as I already mentioned, we've got the specified e-money product, so e-money providers will now be in scope of the depository institution definition, and so will be captured by CRS 2.0. Similarly, providers that offer central bank digital currencies will also fall in scope. Importantly, the area where we see the overlap is in respect of security tokens. So security tokens, because they represent a financial asset, will be in scope of the CRS, but equally, because they're issued in crypto form, will be considered a relevant crypto asset. And so with that, they'll be covered under both frameworks. Now, there's currently an effort taking place at the level of the OECD, and that's propelled by the Business Advisory Group, to treat certain such products as only being reportable under the CRS if they meet certain criteria. But of course, those discussions are still ongoing. If you're interested in contributing to them, please get in touch with us. And it's still uncertain where it will land. We don't have much time for it to land, so.
So it's continue to watch this space, but in the next few months, certainly. So Daniel, tell me, when do these new rules for CARF and CRS 2.0 go live across the globe? And could you tell me a bit more specifically about the EU's DAC 8? Sure,
Nangel. So there are a number of jurisdictions that have committed to adopting the CARF. A number of them will go live on the 1st of January 2026. Some are adopting later in time, so 2027, and others haven't specified when they're going to do it. The EU is looking to implement CARF through the 8th Amendment to the Directive on Administrative Cooperation. This is the rule, the foundation in Europe for the automatic exchange of information. And so that has been adopted in the EU from the 1st of January 2026, and member states are implementing locally in their jurisdictions. What's really interesting about the EU approach is that they've anchored the adoption of CARF in the EU through the DAC 8 in the regulatory regime for crypto assets. And so this means that the scope and some of the definitions have changed. And so, for instance, if you're authorized to engage in crypto asset activities in the EU, you're in scope. And potentially, even if you have customers in the EU, you're in scope. And that creates real problems for offshore entities that do business in the EU. They're having to look at compliance in a slightly different way.
Fantastic. Thanks, Daniel. So my understanding is that over 50 countries will have their CARF and CRS 2.0 legislation in effect as of 1 January next year. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And even more countries the following year. So affected businesses will certainly need to be preparing for these new rules over the coming months. A tight time frame, as you were saying, Arthur. Arthur, from your experience, what are some of the tricky issues you've been seeing lately as businesses, are preparing for these new rules in the coming months?
Yeah, I would say that there's two issues apart from the one I mentioned on security tokens. So firstly, we have the definition of specified e-money products, which is very narrow, and currently it's uncertain as to whether any stable coins, for example, would be able to meet that definition and therefore be carved out from the CARF and put in scope of the CRS. So there's discussions going on around that as to what that definition entails, and as well as at what level the criteria for the SEMP definition will be tested, so at the level of the issuer or each individual account holder. Another big issue are the nexuses under the CARF, which are cascading. So at the same time, we have cascading nexuses from strongest to weakest, and equally we have a waterfall of jurisdictions joining in different times. And so there's a possibility that an intermediary may meet a weaker nexus in a first tier, which will later be superseded by a stronger nexus. What that means in practice is that intermediary will then have to initialize reporting and due diligence obligations in that weaker jurisdiction before switching it to the stronger jurisdiction. Now, discussions again are ongoing at the OECD as to a potential soft landing, whether that will be reflected in a systematic way in the rules or whether that'll be an ad hoc relief granted at the level of each jurisdiction. That remains to be seen.
So this was the staggered implementation issue you were both telling me about earlier. And to wrap up for today, Daniel, could you tell me what are the top few actions you would recommend that in-scope businesses should undertake in the coming months to prepare for these new rules?
So, Nangel, there's not a lot of time to get ready, right? 1st of January 2026. I would focus on a couple of things. The first is scope, understanding where there are potential reporting obligations, and Artur said about nexus and things like this. The next question is around scale, the type of tokens that are involved in reporting. So again, as Artur mentioned, there's issues around stable coins and security tokens. Figuring out what's in and what's out is really key. Then the third thing is really around sort of the solution, right? So how are you going to deliver compliance? There's huge volumes of transactions, huge volumes of customers, millions of customers. A lot of people touch crypto assets. And so getting ready in time is going to be a big challenge. So our recommendation is to start soon.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much for joining me today to share your insights. And thank you for joining us. Please come back next time so that you stay global tax ready.